And he left.
Okay, we're live. Welcome to the book launch of Clayboy by Craig Sawyer, and we're joined by Greg Stewart. You know, Steve and I, we're the publishers of Bridget's Gate Press. Craig, introduce yourself. Tell us a little about yourself and what you got going on.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in today. We got a great group of people that are going to keep you entertained today. And so I'm the writer of Clayboy. And if you don't know about the story, it's about a bullied middle schooler who doesn't have any friends. And he works with Clay as therapy because his mother got tragically murdered by a serial killer, as they do in horror novels. And he works with Clay for therapy. And he comes across a video about how to make a tulpa, which is like an imaginary friend, but it's deeper than that. And the more you feed this imaginary friend, the more sentient it becomes, and it finally demands the body to be made by Caleb. So this kind of comes into his dark side coming to life a little bit. So that's the gist.
Very good. And it's out live now. You can buy it anywhere you buy a book. So, and what, Craig, how about Greg with a G? How about you?
How about me? Craig and I actually worked together in Southern California, and we've collaborated on a couple things in the past. And Craig is an amazing writer. And the first time I really saw his writing was when he had written a short film, which was so funny. And I had done the music for it because I'm also a songwriter and a composer. And so I had done the music, and we had a really fun time collaborating together. And Craig was pretty instrumental for me in reading some of my early work and giving me some really great feedback when I started to really transition into more long form writing beyond songs and compositions. And he was really instrumental. And I read an early draft of Clayboy and loved it, and just loved the slow burn aspect of it. Just the way it kind of, you creep into this life, and slowly the town begins to unfold and these characters. And I just thought it was really well done. And yeah, I'm really just honored to just be here celebrating this with him, just seeing it out in the world after reading an early draft back then, and just watching the metamorphosis of it and the collaborative spirit, that's necessary, I think, with any novel. You get feedback from friends, and then you start getting feedback from other authors, and then you start getting feedback, and suddenly it finds a home, which is really beautiful. And I really, from the very beginning, I knew this story was going to find a home, and I'm really excited to see it with you guys. Really cool.
Oh, we're really excited about it too. And for me, it's kind of nostalgic because it's got that kind of 80s feel. I'm going to reveal my age soon. But it's the kind of horror feel that I grew up with. And tulpas had a kind of renaissance in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, I think, at least here in Kansas, and parts of the Midwest. And so it kind of has that, the horror I read in the 80s, which probably was mostly written in the 70s, has that small town, slow burn, coming of age characters feel. And so that's one of the things I really liked about the manuscript, first off. And one of the things we always do here is I almost invited my mom to this one because it reminded me a lot of one of the books she read to us. But my mom read to us when we were kids, and like all horrible kids, it became one of those things where she had to read to us every night, no matter how late she worked. She was a nurse, and whether she had strep throat or the flu, if we were out of town, she would call us and read us a chapter. And we were merciless and begging for more long past bedtime. But because of that, when I read books, at some point when I'm really enjoying the book, the narrator in my head, there may be more than one voice in my head. The narrator in my head takes on my mother's voice. And so it's like she's reading me the story as I'm reading it. Yeah. And so
that's when she knows we've got a hefty story.
That's when I tell Clyde and Steve that I'm ready to greenlight the book. And they get a little fussy, and they're like, can you finish the book? Can you make sure, this doesn't end horribly, and we aren't going to have to write the author at some point and say, hey, we actually just finished it, finish the whole thing. But this was it for me. Before Caleb could pick it up, Mark stomped on it and smeared it across the concrete floor. This caused a churning heat in the pit of Caleb's stomach that moved into his chest until the feeling started ticking its way to his arms and head. Something was screaming inside his head, but his outside looked calm. And I should say that this is when Caleb is bullied in school, and like Craig had said, and so one of his clay pieces had been, smushy smashy by a bully. But the thing I like about it is the feeling, because we've all had it, right? You remember when you were younger and there was no anger management skill under your belt yet.
Mm-hmm.
So something bad would happen and it was like a heat you could feel rush up your body, like it would run from the tips of your toes to the tips of your fingers and the roots of your hair. And it was almost itchy and sticky.
I think you still have that.
I do. But therapy can only get you so far. But I like that feeling because it's so real. And you can imagine, listen, middle school in America is just one of those things that you survive.
Oh, yeah. That's the roughest part of school, I think, is middle school, for sure.
It really is. And I'm not sure you even learn anything new in middle school. It's just like a holding ground. Like you're too young to release with the older teenagers, but you're too old to keep with the elementary school kids. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like some weird middle school prison where none of the teachers seem happy to be there and everything you learn seems redundant or stupid. The only thing I remember
it's like an adolescent's purgatory, just to go over here and you got to go over here for a couple of years just till you get all this worked out a little bit, and then you get to go to high school. Yeah.
It's really rough. It's really rough. No, I don't think you should read Playboy to a small kid. It may give them ideas. But I think that's one of the pulls, though, is that if you've made it this far into adulthood, you can remember middle school without vomiting. But you can still kind of tap into
barely.
the awfulness of it. And so the character. So what was your inspiration for writing a story?
There's a lot of things that kind of went into the blender of writing, like my own experiences growing up, obviously, and then the experiences I see of other kids. I didn't get bullied. I think everybody gets bullied a little bit.
Yeah.
And then some people get bullied a lot. And so I saw kids get it much worse than I got it, but and also it was kind of an allegory to, in a way, not exactly the school shootings per se, but definitely inspired by that, because the big question, I think, Clayboy, I think every good story, even if it's a B monster story, needs some kind of theme inside of it deep. You don't have to be overt about it, but it needs to have a deeper meaning, especially if you're going to write a novel to keep your fires a burning to finish this thing. You got to have something to question, I think, burning inside you that needs to be answered. And I think one of the questions is why some people that go through a tragedy in life, the principal goes through his own tragedy with his father, kind of. Caleb's going through a tragedy of the bullying and the loss of his mother. Why do some people never want to inflict that tragedy that was inflicted upon them, while some people want people to feel the pain they felt and they want to inflict it on other people going forward? The Columbine shooters. If you got bullied, whatever their story was, or whatever bullied people decide, I'm going to go kill people now. You become worse than what actually hurt you. You become the thing that you hated. And I've always been fascinated by human behavior. Why do humans do that? Why would you ever want to hurt somebody the way you've been hurt? That just seems baffling to me,
Yeah.
But interject, please, that's,
Why do it? Why do it when you can write a horror novel and really process it?
Make art. I always say, art is so important, whatever it is, whatever. Art's funny. If you go golf or whatever on your spare time, people's like, so are you going pro? But when you write a book, it's like, so you making money yet? Are you pro yet? So anything you do art wise in America, people expect you making money instead of just doing it to, cause you need to express yourself. Otherwise you are going to pop. and be vile to people. You know, there's a dark side of this. I'm very into Carl Jung, and you know, the archetypes and the subconscious.
Oh,
And my next novel really dives into that heavy with ayahuasca and the Jungian archetypes. But I've always been fascinated by the good and evil in a person's soul and the dark side, and being able to tame that. I think you need to let it out and tame it, either through art or through something else, exercise. Otherwise, whatever you bury, you become. And if you repress something, it's coming out in a matter of dark, dark ways. That's when you see like the preacher who's preaching against gay people all the time. Oh, and then he gets caught with a prostitute.
Right.
You know, it's like, you know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I have a friend who's a social worker, and she works primarily with the elderly. And the one thing she always says to all of us anytime we get together is, you guys, you got to deal with your shit now, because your shit will own you after 70. Like, we are running out of time to flush the evil out of us, because apparently the gloves come off once you reach a certain age, and there's no more filters. I mean, which we went through with my grandmother, but I mean, like, no filter at all. And if you've got something festering inside of you, I think that's a good example of you become it eventually.
Well, that only leaves me 14 years.
I know, you got to start working hard, man. That's all I do, because you got New Orleans voodoo stuff deep in your soul. Like, you gotta start working hard. You gotta start working hard and fast.
Yeah, you got to take care of that childhood kind of shit before you too long. Otherwise, it comes back on you. You got to face it. You can't hide it. You can't run from it. You got to figure it out. For sure.
Yeah.
I think it's the real gift of creativity. I mean, I think it's like we tend to think of everyone societally wants to frame it in terms of like how many books you're selling or who loved it, who gave it a 5-star review. But the real gift of taking the time to like write a novel is the things you're uncovering in your own subconscious, the things you got to learn about yourself in the process. That's the real gift. What happens once it's out in the world is almost none of your business, really. It's like people are either going to love it, they're going to get it, or they're not going to get it. But the real gift of it is the work you get to do on yourself, you know, through the process of doing it, which is why I think it's so critical that we don't ever hand this experience, this actual healing process off to AI. It's like, why would you do that? Why would you hand that healing work away when you could actually be doing this work on yourself to really just be more at peace with all your darkened light, you know, later in life, you know? And I think also to that point is why I think middle school is like the perfect kind of atmosphere to start exploring this darkened light, which is what, you know, through bullying and things like that. I remember having a conversation with a friend, just to piggyback on middle school. I had a friend, there was about 10 of us all talking about, we got roped into, tell us your most embarrassing moment of your life. And we're all sharing this and we're laughing so hard. But then one friend says, the entire 7th grade. That's it. That's the most embarrassing moment. Like, you know what? You may win. You win. That's it. That's it. You know. But I think that's the thing that makes Caleb, I think, really. You have a lot of empathy for that character because he's been through some serious trauma and he's just trying to figure out how to process it. And he's only getting hit over the head with even more bullshit. And it's relentless for him. And I think, I don't know, there's no real rules to writing, but I think one thing that definitely puts you a leg up is creating you know, your main character having someone that the audience is rooting for and really feels for. And I think that's the thing I love about him, you know?
That's the empathy of a good character, I think, is even if you write a morally gray character, if you write it in a way where there's something about that character where you can be empathetic and that you relate to, it's a story that sticks with you.
Yeah, and I think that's shining through with this book because, you know, I consider myself a so-so writer. I'm getting better. And that's what's great about writing, like playing guitar. You're always going to get better. You're never going to figure it out completely. It's always going to be a puzzle that you're getting better at and you're having to work on, which I dig. But I think no matter what your skill level is, you know, if you can write a character that people have empathy towards and care about, they'll forget some of the technical foibles and they'll love that character. And that's what I feel like I'm getting from Clayboy is like a lot of people saying, I didn't want it to end, you know, at the end, you know, I feel like, you know, like if my only complaint is I wish it would have been longer, but I kind of want that. I kind of want you to be left with like wanting a little bit. I think that's a good sign, you know?
They say that about art and food. You should always want more than what's been served or that you've seen or that you've read.
Yeah, I think that's what as a writer is much more so than the dollars that are brought in and the ratings out there. When people can say, wow, this really spoke to me, or I really identify with this character, then you're successful as a writer. I mean,
Right.
you reached, even if it's just one person, you reached them. You made them feel something. And I think, to me, in my mind, that's a lot more important than any
Right.
than
The
money
dollar
that comes
sign.
in.
Yeah. So what inspired you to go into hold on, I'm gonna get there. The monster, Tulpa. What jeez.
What inspired
Come on,
you to
Heather.
write about a tulpa?
Tulpa, right. Where did the tulpa come from? Have you always wanted to write about a tulpa, or did you stumble on it recently?
Well, my tulpa wrote this book. I didn't even write this book.
That makes sense.
Duran is real. He's real. You got to curious, like when you're writing a book and focusing on these characters, are you creating a character? You know, are you forming a tulpa in a way? But what's interesting about tulpas is it could encompass so much of the supernatural, like, you know, magical, like, you know, when people hear voices in their heads that are real. When you dream at night, for instance, all those characters in your dreams are autonomous, doing what they want to. Sometimes they hurt you, sometimes they help you, but that's really you. That's really your subconscious bringing these characters to life, but they're sentient in your dreams. So they're almost like these tulpas, these things you've created from your subconscious going around in your head. And you got to think, when people hear, you know, you can go back, you know, whether you're religious or not, people hear voices of God, you know, other things. The more belief they put into something, are they actually creating something that's real in a way? And it goes back. I think the first time I heard tulpa was, remember the old creepypasta stuff?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think they were talking about kind of Slender Man as kind of a tulpa a little bit.
Yes.
That's the first time I think I heard a tulpa. And then I thought it was just a made up monster. And then I did some research and I'm like, oh, tulpas have been around for a long time, you know. And I think I mentioned this in my book. There was a French explorer who created a tulpa. I think she was in Tibetan mysticism, and she focused and made this. She called it a jolly monk, and this monk became real, and she started seeing physical manifestations of this monk out of the corner of her eye. She focused on it for months through meditation, but she said the one thing that happened is it started becoming increasingly more sinister and more sinister and evil. And
she had to dissolve it.
She had to dissolve it, but maybe that's a fact. Our subconscious, we can't control very well. Well, like in the movie, what is it, Inception, where he went to the dream world, and if they noticed him, they turned on him. It's like that well of subconscious we can't really control very well. So whatever you create will eventually turn against you.
I'm almost sure that was Alexandra David Neal, who was.
Yeah, I think you're right. That sounds right.
Sick, and she was. What's the proper term for somebody who practices theosophy? Theosophist. She was a theosophist, and she also studied Tibetan Buddhism, and she was really big into the theory of thought forms. And in Tibetan Buddhism, especially, this is something that's usually taught to you by a Bodhisattva, and it's how you move into your next life forms to move up, you know. Sorry, I didn't mean to almost bring you with my ring, but
very Jacob's Ladder. Have you seen Jacob's Ladder, the movie?
Yeah,
it's kind of along that lines of they call them the bardos. You go through a certain amount of bardos, which is your evolution from the physical life to the next realm,
spiritual level. And so there's a whole bit in theosophy, which maybe America's true. I'm fine. I'm not going to go off. Okay, I'm getting excited. Leaning forward.
Talk on. It's fine.
Right. But theosophy is one of those things where I think this is going to be the religion America invented. And it actually started with a Russian immigrant, but it became a philosophical school that really delved into mysticism and occultism, and they considered themselves a religious group. And I meant to look up whether or not they ever filed a church status, any of them. And I'm not sure if they did, but it was really big in this country. I'm going to say from like 1890 to probably as late as the 1930s. And I think perhaps we're dealing with some Western interpretation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but
Yeah.
Alexandra was really big into these. I think she wrote a book about the different classes or castes of thought forms. And she had a fear, because of her experience, that any tulpa would eventually become evil. That given enough autonomy from where it starts as your thought enhancement or thought embodiment and becomes more independent, that it would turn and be darker rather than lighter. I don't know. It's very interesting.
Kind of like the story of Eden a little bit, with Adam and Eve being turned out of the garden, right?
Right.
I mean, like,
there's a whole thing in Western mysticism, especially, that the further you get from your creation or your creator, the more evil you are likely to become. Like there's so many degrees of separation. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. You could think about it all weekend, really. So it's a shame that tomorrow's Monday. But I don't know. I'm very intrigued by the whole, and I do get very intrigued by the occult, especially in the early 1900s. And I think David Neal was writing like between 1905 and 1915 the most. And I'm trying to think if she came to America. What was the woman's name they called her? They called her Madam. Was it Madam?
I couldn't.
I know you're talking about. Yeah. She was an occult. She was a popular occultist in the.
Yeah,
wasn't she friends with Crowley? I think, and like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Blatsky's Madam Blatsky or Blatskiva or
something.
I can see her. I can see her picture. She had really pale crystal blue eyes, right? Like really eerie. Yes. I can see her face, but I can't think. Yeah.
Yeah, very pale, very pale. And so, and it's kind of the time period of the Fox sisters, and are the spirits really knocking on the table, or somebody fashioned something? Oh, here we go. Somebody else
Blavatsky.
Blavatsky. Yes, there we go.
Patricia's in the feed. Hey, Patricia.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank goodness. None of us had to try to Google it. But it's just. Did you? It's an interesting time period, I think.
What do you think caused that spiritual movement at the turn?
People, get your coffee.
We've hit on some of the subject Heather's really passionate about. This is good.
Right.
Sure.
Well, I feel like we're all kind of very like-minded people, so this is going to be a good conversation. We're going to spring stuff in each other for sure.
Circle back around the book at the end, but until then, I think we talk about occultism for sure. But I think there are a couple of things, and I think part of it is, and listen, my American history is not nearly as good as 14th century England, but I'm going to give it my best whirl. In the 1890s, the country was recovering badly from the Civil War still. And we had essentially what I like to call not our first banking crisis, but a banking crisis somewhere between 1880 and 1890. And this is what eventually will give rise to who we call the robber barons now. And I've got a whole theory about this that I'm not sure we should talk about out loud. But there was a lot of economic crisis, and there became a division, much like we're kind of going through now, where the middle class seemed to be kind of disappearing, and you were either being shuffled back into the lower class systems, or you were struggling to be the bottom rung of the upper class system and often failing and falling far. And so I think one of the things that happens when as a group we go through war and all the horrible, because the things we don't talk about is not only was the Civil War a detriment to the population because of all the people who actually died in the war, but all the people who died in the makeshift prisons because of the war, all the people who died of disease in their makeshift camps out in the field. Dysentery was one of those things that just wiped out whole platoons of soldiers.
Oh yeah. Families. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And, you know, and then of course you have significant economic destruction in the South, and you even have some significant economic destruction in the North. But on top of that, the country, when you struggle to kind of rewrite yourself, and the problem with Civil War, and this is true throughout history, the problem with Civil War is it's like an internal disease that is eating you from the inside out. Because if you go to war with other people in other countries, you get to come home from it and you can enjoy whatever your country did to kind of bolster its own economy in the war economy efforts. Whereas if it's a civil war, there's no war economy boost.
There's no winners in a civil war.
Yeah,
not really.
everybody.
You know, except maybe
No.
the
Everybody's
emancipation was a win, but yeah, just as America,
Right.
it's not very much of a win.
Yeah. So, you know, it's not like you can be like, you know, after World War II, there was this huge economic boom and big growth in the suburbs. You know, when the GIs came home, and a lot of women kept part-time jobs. So there was more cash for families to spend. You know, when it's a civil war, a lot of people don't come home. I mean, one of the things that's always been interesting in our family lore is my direct descendants came home, but there were a couple of brothers and cousins that aren't on any death rolls and just never showed up again. And there's an old family story that one of them just settled in Virginia. Like he was in Virginia when the war ended, and instead of going back to Maine, he just stayed in Virginia and lived out the rest of his days there. None of us have any idea if it's true.
Yeah,
but
and it makes sense that spirituality would bloom from that, and talking to the dead. You've lost everybody at that time. Lost somebody. You know, the death was just in the air, basically.
Right.
Well, there were families that, depending on where you were in the States, there were families that were turned against each other. It wasn't just a political civil war. There were sometimes, you know, your cousins are
that was
south
true
of
in your
Nathan
family.
Dixon line, and the rest of the family is north.
Yeah.
And it's like,
well, in your family, everybody was a Southerner, but one half of the family sided with the North and were ostracized by the rest of the family.
Well, you know, people always say, well, like if I was in then, I would have stand for what's right. But if you're in a home and you're living in Alabama and your father and your brothers all go fight for a certain party, are you going to be the only one in that family not to go fight with them? You know, it's. I think it's about sometimes supporting your family, what they're doing at that time. You know,
it's easy to always think what we would do, that we would know better. You know, we would know better and we would do better.
And we forget that we're acting on knowledge we've gained since then.
Right. Instead of the knowledge you have in the time. Because the story you believe in Alabama is not the same story that's being told in Connecticut. You know, especially before the internet. I mean, we talk about that because Steve grew up in New Orleans.
And that's a whole other topic.
And boy, the stuff they tell in their history books are not like what was in the history books here in good old Bleeding, Kansas. Let me tell you.
And there's a lot of things taught that were never mentioned when I went through even world history.
Right.
You know, but definitely not in American history. There was a lot of things I learned about it as an adult. I'm like, wait, what? This happened where?
Oh, yeah. Well, and just yesterday, I met a teenager who's in high school here who had no idea what the Mason-Dixon line was.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, hold on. What year are you in school? And I think she's a senior, you know? And I was just like, okay.
I think there's a fear of like, no one is to talk about uncomfortable things, but that's a detriment to moving forward. You need to talk about uncomfortable things in history.
Right.
So you don't repeat uncomfortable things.
But I think that's kind of the rise of the spiritualism. Like, I think Theosophy gets a name, I think, technically in like 1905. But I think for 20 years before then, and maybe even 40 years before then, you kind of have the rise of the speaking to the dead. You know, after the Civil War, there's boxer in the Rocky movies, you know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jay.
What's up, Jay?
Good job. That's exactly correct.
Welcome, my
But-
friend.
You know, but there are all these stories after the Civil War, for like 10 years after the Civil War, about wives who are speaking to their dead husbands or their dead sons. And so I think there was kind of an embodiment of occultism that rose out of the Civil War and kind of nested in the American mindset. And then you had the economy
Well, and
take a turn, and then
let's also look at the fact that after the Civil War, what else happens is you have a lot of expansion. We're moving
right,
in a
moving
big way,
west.
moving south. There's a lot
And
new
moving
states
west.
coming in,
Yeah,
former territories that are becoming states, gaining new states altogether,
right.
and a lot more, I guess, cultural mixing too.
Right. Right. And so I think it was just kind of the right
Time of a lot of change. Really.
right, the right time, the right place. But I think anytime a society goes through huge economic upheaval right around the time of war and a lot of death, I think that we're primed for new occultist philosophies of some kind. And I mean, I had a friend who really wanted to write their thesis on the rise of neo-paganism due to the Vietnam War.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
their advisor shot it down. But because you guys, and here's the funny thing, not because of religion, but if you study history in school and you're a history major, the one thing they kind of grind into you that anything that's happened within the last 50 years is still a current event. We aren't far enough away to really understand what happened. And so, we're still our perceptions are still very influenced by the people who were alive. And it's one of those things where you want all the primary sources you can get. So you want to interview all the people who are still alive to record everything. But at the same time, you have to take it with a huge grain of salt because they lived through it and they're telling you their point of view of what they lived through and not a bigger global picture. And so her advisor concluded it and said, listen, talk about paganism in Ireland when the Christians showed
After
up
the
instead.
potato famine.
She didn't get to do it, but I've always wondered culturally what connections you could make to that, because that was a big deal in the 70s. That's when they wrote, wasn't that when what's her name wrote Drawing Down the Moon? Wasn't that 1977 or I can't remember, but
What do you think, like that spiritualism and like supernatural and horror in general, do you think it gets bigger when the world is at its darkest sometimes? Do you think people want to read horror when the world's bad or when it's good?
Here's what I'm going to tell you. I want to read it when it's bad because I need the cathartic release.
That's where I lean more. And like you watch movies, there's a lot of horror movies on right now. It's like and the world's kind of in an unstable place more than usual right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's why when I crave horror, it's when the world is really bad, or when I've made the mistake of listening to the Farm Futures, which is a big mistake in Kansas right now with the wheat crop we just had. Like I had a really rough summer because I accidentally listened to it on the day they announced the percentage of wheat crop that had failed in Kansas. And I was like, holy shit. So, because it's the second year in a row, which is not good. I mean, we're a wheat state. So not good. And with the war in Ukraine, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. And so I'm like, oh, good, no wheat anywhere. So that's cool. Back to potatoes we go.
I kind of think that it's popular and people enjoy it in one form or another, regardless of whether we're going through a good time or a bad time.
Sure.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Because, and this is a quote from Tolkien, and it's actually from the book The Hobbit. There's a passage in there that says, stories about, and I'm paraphrasing this quite a bit, but stories about good times, good memories, good years are told very quickly. And there's really not much to say. Oh, that was a great year. Whereas while stories about gruesome, palpitating, awful things take a good deal of telling, and they make a great tale.
Yeah, any good story's got to have something that people have to go through, and that changes them. Happy times are, like you say, are few and far between years. I think America's been at war for the past 60, 70, 80 years. I don't know, maybe longer than that. But yeah, you got to have you got to have some drama. You got to have some, bloodshed to make a story good. That's, it's a journey.
Yeah, there's got to be a journey of some kind. But I do think it's interesting. Well, when you read horror, I mean, here's the thing. Steve and I read horror just as kind of like a daily event, especially now that we're publishers. Sure. Funnily enough, nobody's sending a lot of sunshine stories. But before, like 10 years ago when we read horror, did we read it when it was calm, or did we read it more when things were bad?
Again, I'm going to go back to, I read a lot of Stephen King in the 80s and Dean Koontz and other authors. And I loved all those stories. And I was in
middle school.
There was no.
I think I read some Stephen King in grammar school. I think I read a lot. I used to read Alan Moore comics, things that were way too adult for me to be reading at the time. But I think people underestimate kids too.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people ask me, "Was Playboy kind of reads like a teen book, like a young adult book, but at the same time, it's really dark though. It's like, it's about really kids, dark, right? Yeah. But it's got dark things. But I think younger kids, especially these days, they can handle a little bit more than we give them credit for. I don't think like a 10-year-old should read Playboy, but a 13-year-old, 12-year-old, yeah, I believe they can handle Playboy.
My parents never censored what we read. As a matter of fact, my mom raised us on the actual fairy tales by Perrault and by Grimm, not Disney.
Oh, they were super dark.
Yeah, when we went to see the Disney films in the movie theater, we were like, what
is this crap? What's
Snow White lives happily ever after? Did they not read
no way.
Yeah. So I mean, it was very different. So like we never shied. I think I have to ask my mom how old we were, but my mom took my sister and I to Estes Park. I had to have been over 10, but I think younger than 13. So my sister would have been barely 10. She took us to Estes Park. We stayed in the Stanley in the room Stephen King wrote The Shining in. And then we went to the used bookstore in town. We got giant pancakes at the diner in town. Yeah. And then she went and got The Shining from the used bookstore because, of course, they've got like 20 copies. And she read it to us while we stayed there at the Stanley. And the best part of that story is Stephen King has that bathroom scene, and the Stanley, for at least this room, has not changed the bathroom. So we just got done reading that scene. It was like 10 o'clock at night. You didn't go to the bathroom
for a while.
My sister refused. She went in, turned on the light, closed the door, opened the door, came back out and said, "This bathroom's just like the book and I can't use it." So my mom made me get dressed and take her down to the hotel lobby to use the public bathroom outside the steakhouse, which I think at the time was more of a bar.
Which is probably scarier than the hotel bathroom. I'm sure.
Right. I thought it was. I didn't want to go down that creepy elevator to take her to the bathroom. So, but
oh wow. Gee, I wonder why you're a publisher of horror books now.
Right.
How did that happen?
Right. It's a mystery, right? It's a mystery. But my sister refused, like on Sunday, she was like, no more of this story. And so we had to switch to something else. I think we read Little Women on the way home. And
something a little more chill.
All right. And but my sister to this day has not read The Shining in its entirety. She saw the movie a couple of years ago, but she will not go back and reread the book. And I can't blame her because Stephen King ruined my sister and I both. Yeah. Mine was it.
Well, and I think horror reflects the fears of every generation too. There's some, if you look at the books and the stories and the movies that come out, even if it's a good time. Now, this wasn't necessarily a great time. The 60s were a time of upheaval.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
War and rebellion and all that. But what's one of the big horror movies or stories that come out of the 60s, was late 60s, early 70s, was The Exorcist.
I was gonna say I don't know, Grandpa.
And-
Not all of us are that old.
Okay, you know what?
You guys are hilarious.
Makes a point in the book Danza Macabre that that The Exorcist reflects the fears of the parents
yeah.
during that time frame. Because what is it really? If you read the subtext, it's about a parent whose child is rebelling against everything they are
Mm-hmm.
and going totally crazy, turning against them. And really, that's
church,
that's
the
the
family
fear
ideals.
represented there.
Excellent
is
point.
losing,
Because The Exorcist is really a family drama
Yes.
with
Yeah.
the Exorcism thrown in there, and I think that's what modern horror movies have really forgotten. What you do is you make a really good movie with characters that you invest in, and then you drop the horror in that scenario.
Right.
And like you say, Playboy's a slow build. I come from that generation too. Like, you got to build atmosphere, and who cares if the characters die if you don't give a shit about the characters
Right.
or what they're going
Right.
through.
This is true because you're not invested. So you're not like, I always say the bravest thing an author does is kill a character that their audience loves, because man, that's hard to get over.
Now, do you think Caleb died at the end, or you think he lived at the end?
I think he died. What do you think?
No spoilers.
No spoilers. Okay. No spoilers.
But I mean, it's not apparent though, so you keep on reading. You're not going to be sure either. Yeah.
It's a choose your own adventure. It's kind of, Katie Marie did that at the end of her book, A Man in Winter. It's a choose your own adventure ending that
you're free to read your own subtext.
That's really interesting that you asked that, because I think you and I had a conversation about it when we were first reading before we even sent a contract.
Right.
And at that time I thought he lived. And so, but I've changed in the many rereadings of it, as you go through as a publisher, you change your mind about certain things and about characters.
And in that one, was it the ghost, or was it all in his own head?
Oh yeah, and Katie Marie's.
Is this the dementia, or did he really see a ghost?
Yeah, listen,
and it's
I love, these are my favorite endings. My favorite endings are the choose your own adventure endings. They really are, because the more you reread that book, the more you change your mind about how it really ends.
Yeah, and it makes for a lot of great discussions with your
you got to leave the reader some room to imagine things sometimes, and that's where it gets scarier, because they're in their own head thinking about it.
Yes, thinking about stuff. I agree. And I think I think it's one of those things that aggravate a lot of readers. Like, they want an ending wrapped up and handed to them in a bow. But I also think it's one of those things that we love to hate. You know what I mean? Like, we're like, oh, I need a concrete ending. But truthfully, you think about that book without a concrete ending more than you do one that has a concrete ending. You constantly wonder what happens on the next page that's blank.
Right. Another great example, I'm sure everybody here has seen Pet Cemetery, the old one, not the new one.
Yeah,
I'm actually reading that book right now.
Look at that. Nice.
Enough. Yeah, boom. Yeah, and
his
his earlier prose, is so good in this. Like, you reread. When I first started writing, I would just copy pages of authors I love. I would just copy them verbatim, and then I would plug my own characters' names into them and copy them again and copy them again. Just trying to get the feeling of that beat. Of how the rhythm of how they write.
Great. It's a great exercise.
Yeah, the rhythm.
And that's one thing.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, I saw the movie Pet Cemetery first, the old one from the 80s. And then a year later, I read the book. And I got to tell you, I love the ending in the book so much better. The movie, you know what happens. But at the end of the book, it's like, that is such
ending.
Powerful 3-word sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and it haunts me to this day thinking about it. I mean, have you all both read the book already, or?
Well,
I've read it years ago, and I'm reading it again right now. So yeah, I think it's one of his best books, honestly.
Yeah, but I'd like to know what you think after you finished it. When you read the very end.
The last sentence is a doozy. But I mean, it's interesting because I think when somebody said what would be your subgenre for Clayboy, I told Steve, I said occultist. And he goes, Heather, everything can't be occultist. And I'm like, I mean, like, I hear you, but just hear me out. The tulpa is an old thing. Like,
Right.
it's a revisit of what I think is probably a badly interpreted or translated Tibetan Book of the Dead, because I think we're missing the stronger religious piece of it.
But we struggle. Does this go under fairy tales, mythology, and folklore?
Oh yeah.
Or does it go
it's magical thinking. I mean, he's basically casting a spell in a way. I mean, he's using, what is magic? You're using your mind to manifest something, right?
That's something. Right. So that's one of the things, like, I know Steve thinks, oh, same as Shawshank. Look at this one. Same as Shawshank. Book ending better than the movie ending.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I read Shawshank.
Well,
Stephen King and I had to separate when I was.
Did you have a breakup?
Yeah, we broke up when I was 15.
Reading the book,
He didn't realize that at the time. But we had a pretty strong breakup during it, which I have to this day never finished. Even though we're back together now,
because of
we've decided that we can't revisit it or it'll cause another divorce. But yeah, it was bad. It jacked me up so bad. In the middle of the night, I took my bed off the bed frame and took my closet door off its hinges. I mean, at like 2 a.m. Went around the whole house and turned all the lights on, including the lights in the bedrooms where people were sleeping. I opened all the curtains. I mean, like, I was like, listen, we got to be able to see the whole yard. We're going to have to light up this yard like a Christmas tree. Like, we got to see everything coming. We've got to be able to identify every shadow. We can't.
You have to have the perimeter lit at all times.
Right. Yeah. Right. And still to this day, and I think it's because of that, when we read something scary or watch something scary, it has to be like long before sundown. And
it can't involve electronics.
Right, nothing with electronics. We can't do haunted electronics, but that's not really horror's fault as much as it is. Nobody can really explain.
When I was a kid, I used to stay at my grandfather's on the weekends, and he had goats. And if you've ever heard, the reason they call baby goats kids is when they scream, they sound like children screaming.
Yeah.
So I'm like 11 years old in my bed, and there's like at night. And one time I got up and I walked in my grandfather's room, and I was standing in his bed. Now, my grandfather went to war at 19, was drafted off the farm. Like, this dude is cold stone business, And he gets up, he said, "What the hell are you doing up?" I was like, I'm scared. He said, "Scared of what?" I was just scared of the dark and like this freaking goats, man. And he says, but he didn't say shut up and go to bed. He got up, put his clothes on. He said, "Come on," put a flashlight in my hand, made me go outside and shine that flashlight in all the dark hedges. Mm-hmm. He's like, "It's just like the daytime, except you can't see nothing. Now go to bed." There's nothing out there. And he made me go see there's nothing out there.
Nothing out there, right.
It's in your mind,
Yeah, that's a pretty
a good imagination is a double-edged sword sometimes.
It is surely to this day. I still act that way. We were in Santa Fe when the Fall of the House of Usher dropped. Is it just called Usher on Netflix?
No, it's Fall of the
House of Usher on Netflix. And so of course we had to watch it in the hotel room, but there had to be rules. I was like, well, we have to open the window and we have to turn all the lights on, including the bathroom light, and we can't watch.
I love it. I love it that you're a publisher of scary books, and you're like, I love it.
But I need the lights on.
Very strict rules. We're watching. What are we watching right now?
Midnight Club.
And so Steve's like, "Do you want to watch an episode after Clayboy's event?" I was like, it's gonna be 4:00. Like that.
I watched the last voyage of the Demeter last night.
Oh, that's such a good one.
That was pretty good. That was really good. It was really good.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, what I loved the most about that, and I think that this isn't really a surprise to anybody, but it's the dread. The dread. Like, if you read Dracula, this isn't a large portion of the book. The captain's log is not like pages and pages of the story. It's this one tiny little section that is full of dread. But boy, taking that little tiny section and growing it into a movie-length manuscript and having the dread in it at every depth. Well done. Very well done.
It felt like an old school when horror movies were good. It built
Yes.
atmosphere. The actors were
Yeah.
good, and I think they could have showed even less
Yes.
of Dracula more, because when he moved, it was a guy in a costume. When he moved, they did CGI, and I hate it when they do this crazy CGI and it just doesn't look real. They did a little bit of that, but they could have just
Not
got
too
rid of that altogether and just done.
Yeah, you didn't need it. You didn't need it. I
You
mean,
didn't need
maybe
it.
you do for, the kids, who are used to the CGI
The
in
youngins.
action. But,
Maybe they don't even care
Yeah.
about it. I don't know.
right. I gotta tell you, you could have done it without it. That film was brilliant. Brilliant.
That's the thing
But-
too with dread as well. It's like
Yeah.
it's the not seeing it amplifies the dread.
Yes.
It's the thing that the blessing of Jaws is like the shark kept breaking,
Oh, yeah.
kept breaking. And they realized it's actually better when you don't see the shark.
It's better.
You
It's
know?
better when you have a
Yeah.
limited budget. You have to be more imaginative, and you got to
Right.
cut corners. But then you got to improvise with the camera, which
Right.
that's
Right.
everything. And then now people are like, well, I can just make a CGI thing of it. Show the monster. Right when you shine a
Right.
light on the monster,
Yeah.
Right.
it's gone.
Because
It's
that's
done.
one of the wonders of Jaws is it's all so
Yeah,
much of it
it's-
is underwater and you don't really see
That's
any of the
terrifying.
real
That's terrifying.
You know,
music. My
I
God.
watched it again last year, and
Ugh.
it's aged well. It's like, even though it's not CGI, it's old school practical special effects. It still works. It was
Yep.
still
I saw Jaws way too young. To
Yeah.
this day, I still can't watch Jaws, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't swim in it. I can't
That
swim in a
messed me up.
swimming
Jaws
pool.
messed me up. I surfed for a while, but the first time I ever went surfing, I was out here, and you go out on the ocean at dawn, and the sun's coming up, and all these old surfers are out there, and we're chilling on boards, and all of a sudden, a dorsal fin surfaced right in front of me, and I'm like, and it kind of bumped my board, and it's dark, and I'm like, fuck, shark, and I'm like, I'd be faster on my board, but I jump off my board, and I'm like swimming, and the guys are all laughing at me. He's like, bro, that's a porpoise, man. Like, what?
A lot of porpoise on the line.
The dorsal fin is the shark.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was a big fish, though. It was a big fish
Fit.
in the
Yeah.
dark. Yeah.
Jaws ruined a whole generations of us, I think. I mean, when our son watched Jaws, he was not. The music got to him.
Music did a
Yeah,
little bit,
but
Yeah,
he wasn't
that's a
super
great score.
impressed, with the story. But
You know,
But
a really
also-
good book I read recently, a really good book. And I don't know why I read it, but the original book the Rambo movie was based on, First
Huh?
Blood,
First Blood, yeah.
is
First Blood.
one of the best books I have ever read as far as writing. It is a beautiful book. And in the book, the sheriff, if you're familiar with the movie, The Sheriff and Rambo, he's after Rambo. In the book, they alternate their points of view per chapter. They'll do the point of view of Rambo, who is much cockier in the book, and then they'll do the point of view of the sheriff, who was a Korean vet.
Mhm.
And it's just beautiful prose. You ever get a chance to read that book? It is amazing. It's an amazing book.
It is called First Blood, right?
It's called
I
First
think
Blood.
so.
I think
Yeah.
the author's Morley, Morley,
Hmm.
Morley, I think, or Moral. Maybe it's Moral. But
I
yeah,
don't know where it is, but I know he lives in Santa Fe. From the art opening, somebody
Oh.
had done. Remember, somebody had done a painting of the Rambo movie, something. But
All right.
yeah. Okay, so what are you reading right now? So you're reading Pet Cemetery.
I'm reading
Craig, are
Pet
you a one-
Cemetery. Yeah.
Pet
And-
Do you
Cemetery.
read more than one book at a time?
Yeah, I got a book per room. I'm like, I'm almost finished with Something Wicked This Way Comes. It's in the bathroom.
Oh,
Nice.
that's a good one. That's a good one.
Stephen King, his prose is like another dimension. It may be too beautiful. Sometimes I get lost into like a paragraph in his books. I forget what I'm doing. I'm like, what? I read it over and over again. I was like, how can somebody write that beautifully? Like, yeah, he's amazing. Ray Bradbury is a beast. But yeah,
Yes.
writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm reading Pet Cemetery, and I'm trying to keep it down to 2 books right now. And I'm trying to write too. I've been doing so much
Right.
marketing for Playboy. I'm like, oh, I haven't written in like days. I'm just doing marketing all the time.
Yeah.
So,
That's
I get it.
the world of it.
What about
What
you,
you
Greg?
read?
What are you reading?
Well, I have gotten into the terrible habit of being into 3 books at a time. One that I'm on Audible, and then one that I'm physically reading, and then one on the Kindle. And I just
Yes.
so right
Yes.
now, right now, the physical book I'm reading is actually someone you guys know. Is I'm reading the short story collection "Past Best Left Untrodden" from Kev Harrison.
Oh, okay.
So he gifted me with that when I saw him in Lisbon last month, and it was it's been fantastic. I love him, really great. And then the Kindle book I've been into and reading is Kyle Taucher's Livewire, who's with Crystal Lake Publishing. And
I
then
read that.
I'm
That was
listening
great.
to, yeah, so
good.
cool, so great. And then I'm listening to on Audible right now Blood Meridian, which I had never read before. I've read a few Cormac McCarthy, but I've never read Blood Meridian. So it's cool listening to it narrated. It's a bleak book.
Okay.
Yeah.
By Cormac McCarthy? Is that the one? Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, Cormac, he's an interesting author. Talk about no grammar just out the window, whatever he wants to do, he does.
No quote marks. Yeah.
Breaks the rules, man, and it still reads beautifully. Yeah.
Totally. It all makes sense. All real minimalist, really, 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 really cool. Bleak prose, but really great.
What are we reading right now? Steve and I try to co-read. Steve and I read several books at a time, which is not always a good thing. But
together we're reading The Sum of Your Flesh
by Beverly Lee.
Beverly Lee.
Talk about dread. That woman writes dread. What was the one that I had to stop reading? It took me like a year to read it. Like I had to slow Steve down, and I'm like, we can now only read this one page at a time. It was a Beverly Lee book. It wasn't. It was bad. I was like, we are now only reading this book on Saturdays at 10 a.m. from 10 to 11, and then we're not reading it again for a week because I need a week to get myself together. And then what else are we reading? You're reading Lord of the Rings again.
I'm reading Lord of the Rings, and then there's a book by an author I've not heard of before, and I have to go look to see his name, but it's called The Golem of New York. The Golem of Brooklyn.
Right, The Golem of Brooklyn.
It's really good. It's more along the lines somewhere between, what's his name that wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to
Douglas Adams.
Douglas Adams.
Love
kind of along the lines of that, but delving into horror just a little bit.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah.
I used to read The Hobbit every fall. I read The Hobbit like every year for years and years and years and years. For some reason, I just felt like fall because I think they start their journey in the fall. You know.
Yeah.
So, it's all good. Awesome. So, we talked about real ghosts, maybe a real ghost story. Let me become the moderator for a second. Hey, so let's start with you, Heather. Tell me a real either ghost story or supernatural story, something that you can't explain that's happened to you in your life.
I've got that. So I have a bell that I've got a ton of ghost stories. I grew up by the master ghost storytellers, my grandmothers, but I have a bell, a family bell that I inherited that's been passed down through the generations from my, great grandmother. And the story is that she brought it with her over from Ireland. So our family came over from Ireland during the potato famine. And, you know, in America, I always joke, you can throw a potato and hit somebody who's got Irish ancestry if you live in the Midwest. But the family who did not come, who were not able to come, all died. So, like, there's no one to go visit when we go to Ireland except the cemeteries. But every time somebody accidentally rings Kitty's bell, I know it even when I'm not in the house because she wore a lilac perfume and used lilac body wash. And no matter where I am, it's like I'm flooded with lilacs. And one of our favorite family stories is I was down in Lawton, Oklahoma working, and my son, who sometimes can be a bit of an ass, knows the thing about the bell. And one day he was really mad at me. I called and I said, listen, I'm going to have to stay an extra 7 days. So you and your dad are going to have to figure out food, which always made the kid a little nervous. And because Steve's culinary expertise are hot dogs and fish sticks. And
sounds great.
So the kid, to get back at me, came into my office and rang the hell out of that bell. And so I called home like 2 hours later, and all I said was, Connor, quit ringing the damn bell, because I was in the office and all of a sudden it was just lilacs everywhere. Everywhere. That's all I could smell. And then I'll have dreams about her. And I never met her. She died when I was like I don't know, 3 weeks old.
Oh wow, you never met her. Wow.
And so the only thing I know about her are things that were in like her local paper, because like her quilting guild raised a lot of money for a new church steeple or something. And the family stories that were passed down. It was a big deal. She was in the paper when I was born because she was a great great grandmother, but she was near the end. She was 93, I think, when I was born, and she was kind of on her last legs. So so I never met her, but I got a cat. She sent a stuffed cat, which I still own, that looks like a horror film.
It's a stuffed cat.
Not a real cat, a stuffed animal cat.
Like this is like her cat stuffed. I was like,
but
wow.
I call it Kitty. She mailed it from Chicago when I was born.
Like a plush kit. Like, okay, got it.
Now it looks like a horror doll because it's got no tail, no ears. It's mostly bald, but I keep it in a box in the closet because it's a little too gruesome to look at. But anytime anybody rings that bell, no matter where I am, anywhere in the world,
that would make an awesome short story or a novel. Yeah, that's spooky. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love it.
Steve.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell now. This one may scare you a little bit. I think it did when I first told it to you. I don't know.
That's a good start, Steve. I like it.
I consider this a ghost story or demons or what. You can be the judge.
Is this the one at Grandma's house?
No.
Okay.
No. So
take it.
This is back in the 80s. I'm a teenager. I was around 16. I'm at a party.
Oh, this is a good one.
And I'll be honest, there were drugs. There were people doing different drugs and drinking and everything.
Right.
You're talking. So you're preaching to the choir, Steve. Yeah.
Teenage party,
right?
So I didn't really partake in that. I had no interest in drugs, alcohol a little bit. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Alcohol a little bit, but I was never drunk until I was an adult. Well, anyway, so I'm sitting there, I'm just listening to the music, watching what people are doing, occasionally talking to someone, but my attention kept going over to the corner, over to my left a little bit. There's a weird looking statue in the corner. Now, let me preface this. I grew up in New Orleans, and a lot of us that grew up there probably have a lot of stories that have to do with voodoo or weird things, but I kept looking over at this statue, and all I could think of now, it was kind of like a totem pole, that it had at least one face at the top and maybe something midways down, but it was kind of freaky looking, a little bit scary. I didn't really like it, but I kept glancing over at it. So anyway, so this guy comes in and sits down on the other end of the sofa. Now he's probably late 20s, 30s, somewhere in there. I don't know who he was, but he gets my attention. I look over at him and he goes, "You like that statue over there?" And I'm like, "No, not really. Maybe."
No.
And he goes, "Yeah, it generally has an effect on people, but why don't you take a look at it again?" So I'm like, okay. So I turned my head. The statue's gone. It's not there in the corner anymore. And I got up. I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm going home. I just left the party, walked out the house, and I never looked back. To this day, it's like, what the hell? What the hell? What the hell? And
what do you think that was?
House spirits and voodoo.
That's what she thinks when I told her the story. She said, house spirit. Me, I have no idea. What could have been somebody pulling a prank on me. He had my attention long enough. Somebody could have moved it. I don't know.
But you weren't sticking around to find out what you got enough, right?
Here's the thing. Steve has a philosophy still to this day that if it's creepy, we don't stick around to find out what it's about.
That's like the movies of the haunted house is like, just leave. Pack your stuff up and get the hell out of there.
He isn't one of those guys who's going to go find out what the sound is. He's like, everybody get in the car, we're out of here.
Yeah,
you would live in the movie. You would be the one that survived. Yeah, for sure.
Amityville Horror would have been a 2-page story.
Yeah.
You walk in, there's flies on the window, and they're spelling "get out." It's like, I'm gone.
When we lived out in the country for 7.5 years. You remember when we first moved into the house? The house had been vacant for like 6 or 7 months, and it was covered in dead flies. And this is cattle country, so there's no way to live without flies in everything you do. And so Steve walks in and he goes, I don't know how long we're going to be able to live here. And I go, why? And he goes, do you not remember Amityville Horror? There should not be this many flies in any kind of house.
I think Beelzebub is here. We have to leave now.
We gotta go. We'll see how it goes. We're gonna take it day by day, but don't get comfortable. So,
oh man,
what about you,
Greg? Yeah. You're up.
All right. So my story is pretty subtle, but I will preface this with one thing. I grew up as I was just very unconscious to that kind of stuff when I was a little kid. Like my grandmother's house, she had this really big cellar, and I would just go down there alone. I'd set up my racetrack on the ping pong table, and I'd just be down there for hours in the cellar. I'd hear underneath the crawl spaces what would sound like whispering, and I'd just chalk it up to either wind or maybe it was the TV, and I would just talk myself out of it. And I wasn't a very frightful kid. Really weird. I was like, I just let it all go. But I'm an adult now, and I'm living in, it was when I was living in Los Feliz, near the Griffith Observatory, right? It's a really nice neighborhood, but there's this one house I'd walk into town from my place, walk to the bank, walk to the public library, you'd pass this one house, this wrought iron gate, and I know what a crack house looks like. This was not that. It was something next level, like ivy growing in, everything black, the tinfoil on all the upper things. I was like, and it just had a vibe, a not cool vibe. And then literally there came a point where as you walked by it, you literally felt the temperature drop. And I would chalk it up to, I don't know, is it maybe that tree? And then there was other days where it'd be like, no, the sun's in a totally other place. There's no shadow from the tree. And still it was somehow colder as you walked by. And I would chalk it up to, it's like, well, there's just some weird vibes with that house. But then there was one day. There's one day where I'm walking and I'm on the other side of the street. Coming the other way are two people in regular clothes and a guy between them who's a priest. He's got the collar on and everything. And as I'm approaching, I see the priest stop dead in his tracks and turn to stare at this house across the street. And the other two people are like talking to him, and they're like whispering to him and trying to get him to like move along. And he seems captivated with this house as I'm approaching. And just watching the effect it was having on him, I was like, I'm never walking by that house again.
Right.
It just
We'll be going around the block.
I was like, no. I'm
Yeah, that'll do it.
He's like, he felt the evil emanating from the house, especially since he was a priest.
There was literally a priest who was looking at the house. And he was like, he was affected by it. And I was like, what is that about?
I think safely, and maybe it's because I am a child of the 80s, but I think safely we can use priests as our like hints. You know, if a priest stops dead or is like, oh, did you feel that? Time to go.
Nope.
Yeah.
Time to go.
Yeah. It was when he was weirded out. Suddenly I was like, oh, this is for real.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you're like, you're no longer in your mind anymore. Other people are feeling the same thing you're feeling, then, especially a priest. So I'm like, wow.
We're getting my intuition to survive. Right.
Wow.
Yeah. That's my little story.
That's good. These are all good. I hope
That's a good one.
I hope I can top it. I got a lot of them too. So we could do a whole show just on ghost stories. I mean,
right. Yeah.
So my grandfather is McCoy. We're Scottish, Irish, Armagh over here, you know, and my grandmother had the most distinct look. She was almost, I think they used to call it black Irish, but she was almost like dark, ruddy skin and crystal blue eyes, like in coal black hair. And she used to have dreams that came true when we were children. Like she predicted my cousin getting ran over by a car 2 weeks before. So I don't know if that's kind of bled into me a little bit, or I picked it up. They say you're more like your grandparents than you are your own parents genetically.
Oh, yeah.
So one time this is the big doozy of my stories, about 7 years ago, I was doing a juice fast. You know, me and Greg used to work at a place. It's a botanical pharmacy. It's like a herbal pharmacy. They do cleanses and juicings and stuff. And I was doing a cleanse. I was doing a fast, and I go to sleep that night, and I wake up in this brilliant, bright room, like beyond HD, not foggy dream, like just crystal clear room, vibrant. And my buddy from high school that I haven't seen in like 15 years walks in, and his name is Michael. And he says, hey, I just want to let you know, man, that it was great knowing you. And he looked the same he looked when I at the time I had known him. We just kind of lost touch. You know, people in high school, you just lose touch with.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, "Hey man, don't worry about this life. It doesn't mean that much. But if you could do me a favor, please tell my family that I'm not in pain." And I still get chills when I tell this story. Like it's like visceral. And I've told the story to people who are in doubt about things, who just lost loved ones. And I think maybe that's why he let me know this, but he was a mischievous dude. It's kind of just like him. I mean, he was no saint by no stretch of the imagination, but he always had a good heart. He was always big heart. He always made the room light up. He's always laughing. So he said, "Yeah, don't worry about anything, man. Please let them know that. And I'm not in pain. And just like, you're going to be fine, man. You're going to have a great life." And I wake up the next day, but it's not foggy. It's very clear still. Felt like more than a dream to me. But I got on the line. I was like, maybe it's my subconscious telling me I need to talk to Michael. I haven't talked to him in a while. So I start looking him up, and my phone rings. It's my brother back in Tennessee. And I pick it up and I say, "Hey," he said, "Hey, I got some bad news for you." And I finish his sentence. I say, "Oh, Michael, his last name, Michael died, huh?" And he paused. He said, "Hey, who told you that?" And then I go right into like detective mode. I'm like, "What time did he die? How did he die?" And they say, "Well, he died. He got hit on a motorcycle and died instantly early that morning, about the time I had the dream, about 3 or 4 in the morning."
Wow.
I'm guessing. I'm like, okay. He said, why are you asking all? Why is it so weird? I said, "I gotta go, man. I gotta go." So I hang up the phone. And my mind's going crazy. And I start thinking like, okay, I was doing a fast. You always hear people have visions with fast. Did that make me closer to some kind of thing when I'm doing a fast? Like, what's going on? So I find his sister. Every summer we used to go swimming over his sister's house. And I find his sister, and I text her. I said, "You got to call me. I got condolences, but I got to tell you something." And she calls me, and I say, "Hey, this is going to sound really bizarre, but your brother came to me in a dream, and he has a message for you." And she just hangs up on me.
Oh, wow.
Now, that's a crazy thing. Just like, did Craig go out to California and like he's in the crystals now?
Right.
Like, wow. And then later she told me that she was kind of upset. Why didn't he come to her too?
Right.
And so some time goes by, like a day or two, and she calls me back, and she says, "Were you serious?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, this sounds really weird. I mean, this doesn't happen to me all the time." I say, "But this is significant. I feel like I need to tell you this." And they said, "Okay, tell me everything." I said, "Michael told me that he's not in pain, that he's happy. He looked happy to me. And he wanted to let his family know that it's okay. And he just had a newborn baby too, on top of all this."
Wow.
And so she paused a minute. She's, "Oh, okay, I'll call you back. I got to process this." So she hangs up again. She calls back about 30 minutes later. She said, "I told his parents and it gave them peace." And it just like this thing lifted up off my shoulders. And then I asked her, I was like, "Can I ask you a few questions?" She's like, "Yeah." I said, "Did Michael become religious lately? Because whatever religion he is, I'm signing up for it," because he was super happy.
I'm gonna find a local one. Yeah.
And like he said, no, he's the same dude. You know, like Michael used to be the kind of guy, you know, back in my party days, who'd come to my house and take the mirror off the wall and knock me out of line or something, you know, and like, "Just wanted to share the love, bro." And then bounce, and like we go to concerts, but always a good guy. Always, never manipulative, just a good-hearted guy. And he said, "Well, he's cleaned up a little bit. He doesn't party as much, but he's not super religious per se, you know," and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, that's just curious to me, because it told me a lot that I think it's what's in your heart. Because I'm at the point now, I've always thought that we go somewhere else, but I'm here to tell you, he was conscious of who he was. His conscience existed beyond his body. And there's no way I can understand if I knew he had died and then I had the dream, I would just be like mourning, right? But I knew this before he died. He was telling me goodbye in a dream before I knew he had died. So to me, this was as real as it gets. I mean, it's, you know.
My great grandma Young used to say that your dead never come to you; they come to people adjacent to the family, because in the first 30 days of grief, the family will always doubt what they think they've seen and heard.
That makes sense.
So she always believed that. She was from Appalachia, so she's got her whole belief system. But yeah, she would always say your dead never come to you first. You never see your dead until 6 months after they're gone.
That's right. And then, like, was I just, and I've thought about this many times, like, where were we at? Were we in my mind? Were we in another plane of existence? Like, was I just in a deep part of sleep enough that he can look around and see who's he can talk to at that moment? And then he's like, well, Craig won't freak out. You know, maybe he just knew I could handle that.
That's what my great grandmother would tell you. We're still alive. She'd say it's always family adjacent. Mia tulpa.
Okay. Mea tulpa, mea tulpa.
Mia tulpa, mia tulpa.
Cool, man.
That's a good way to wrap it
I
up
love
because
it.
Halloween's
Super
just
cool.
around the corner. The big ghost story time, and you know, Christmas is the big ghost story season in my family. Is from November, December until Christmas Day was big ghost story time. But and then I'm gonna take a second to remind everybody that Terrify Your Tablet is on Tuesday, and go to terrifyyourtablet.com. She's gonna have a searchable database of, you can look by author, by title, or subgenre of horror to find who's participating. It's over 200 authors, and I've heard that it's going to be closer to 300, I think.
Yeah,
Wow.
so
Wow.
your chance to fill your Kindle full of good, great
Kindle
horror
or
stories.
Nook or
whatever,
Kobo or Apple Books, and I think BookFunnel's even in on it too in some way with some authors. Because for those of you who don't know, Amazon never lets you list anything at zero, so you have to use these kind of interesting methods to get Kindle involved.
The price match.
Right. So half of our books are will be listed as zero, and we'll see if the other half come live as zero or not on Tuesday.
Yeah.
There's no stress at all. But
I wanted to add too, I wanted to thank you guys once again for taking a chance on my book. I mean, you got it. You know, you got the book and what I was trying to go for. And I knew later, a few people said, well, you need more action at the beginning, and like, you need things to happen right now. And I'm like, no, that's not me. And I knew finally I would run into somebody who got what I was trying to lay down, you know, and you guys did it, and you worked so hard, and you're so fun to talk to. And it's just a real blessing that I met you guys, you know, and that's awesome.
Thank you.
And I wanted to go on to, you know, Greg, thank you so much for reading my stuff, you know, and give me you got great insights. And I wanted to ask you, what do you got coming out right now, and what are you working on right now?
Oh, well, I'm working on a novella right now, something that I kind of got hit with, that I, you know, every now and again there's one of those stories that, like, you know, oh, that's an interesting idea, and then they won't leave you alone, and you have plans to write something else, and then you end up writing this instead. It's that kind of story, and so I'm having a lot of fun with it. My goal is to just make sure it's all buttoned up by the end of the year. You know, I want to utilize the time, finish it up, and have something to share, and maybe try to find a home for it. Yeah. But I'm excited about this one. It feels good.
Well, you're a great writer, man, a great musician. It's awesome, and thanks to everybody for supporting Clayboy. This is a dream come true to get this first novel out the door. And it's been an amazing experience. So I appreciate everybody's getting a copy. Sure. So thank you.
And before we log off here, is there anything in particular you'd like to say to all your readers? I mean, you just said something, but is there anything else you'd like to say to anybody who reads the book? Yeah,
well, support indie horror. You know, there's more than just, you know, although I love the top sellers, there's more people out there that need attention. There's some great writers out there in Hollywood too. Take attention. You know, you're looking for great movie ideas. It blows my mind, some of the indie authors I read that nobody knows about hardly, except for the circle, you know, and just how good they are. It's like, you know, the next Stephen King, the next Lansdale's, the next everybody, they're here. They're here right now.
Indie horror, because the thing about indie horror is you get to take all the risks that the big five can't. You know, and well, listen, I mean, I'm gonna say can't, because I think acquisition editors, there are some that they would kill to take, but they answer to somebody else, you know, just like we all do. So, but so okay, well, it's been a great ride. So remember, Terrify Your Tablets on Tuesday, and you know, anytime after that, you can find Clayboy any place books are sold, and if you don't have a local bookstore and you don't have an indie bookstore that you know of that ships, you can always go to bookshop.org. And if you don't have a bookstore to hook you up with, they'll hook you up with one and get it shipped out to you. So, all right.
Fantastic.
All right, guys.
Congrats.
I'll talk to everybody soon. Have a great day.
Great time with everybody.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys. Bye.
All right. Take care.